They called him the Enforcer, but he never pulled the trigger himself. He had others do it. He was Al Capone's right hand, the man who kept the money flowing, the operations running, the empire expanding. When Capone went to prison, Nitti took over the Chicago outfit. But he had one weakness: claustrophobia. And on March 19, 1943, facing extortion charges and life behind bars, Frank Nitti walked to a railway yard near his home, put a .32 caliber revolver to his head, and pulled the trigger. The enforcer who'd terrorized Chicago for 20 years couldn't face four walls closing in. January 27, 1886. Angri, Salerno, Campania, Italy. In a small town in southern Italy where poverty was inherited like a family curse, Francesco Raffaele Nitto was born to Luigi and Rosina Fezza Nitto, a laborer and his wife struggling to feed their children. Luigi died when Francesco was just 2 years old. His mother remarried Francesco Dolendo, who emigrated to New York in 1890. 3 years later, in 1893, when Francesco was 7, he and his mother and older sister finally joined his stepfather in America. They settled in Brooklyn at 113 Navy Street, a cramped tenement in an Italian immigrant neighborhood where families squeezed into rooms that smelled like mildew and desperation. Young Francesco grew up watching his stepfather work back-breaking jobs for pennies, watching his mother scrub floors, watching the American dream reveal itself as just another form of poverty. But Brooklyn wasn't just home to the Nitto family. It was also home to another family, the Capones. Years later, journalists would claim that Frank Nitti and Al Capone were cousins. They weren't. But their families did live blocks away from each other, and both had come from the same region in Italy. They grew up in the same neighborhood, walked the same streets, breathed the same air thick with coal smoke and broken promises. Francesco dropped out of school after 7th grade. He worked as a pin setter in a bowling alley, then as a factory worker, then as a barber. But honest work didn't pay. So Francesco Nitto became Frank Nitti, and Frank Nitti became a criminal. By 1920, Frank Nitti had moved to Chicago. He opened a barbershop on South Halsted Street. But the barbershop was a front, a place where small-time hoods fenced stolen jewelry, planned burglaries, and made deals. And one day, a man walked into Nitti's barbershop who would change his life forever. Johnny Torrio, one of Chicago's most powerful mob bosses. Torrio was impressed by Nitti's intelligence, his calm demeanor, his ability to keep his mouth shut. And Torrio introduced Nitti to his protege, Alphonse Al Capone. In 1920, Prohibition turned America into the world's largest black market. Alcohol was illegal, which meant selling it was insanely profitable. Capone and Torrio ran bootlegging operations across Chicago, smuggling Canadian whiskey into speakeasies that served as distribution points throughout the city. And Frank Nitti? He became their business manager. While other gangsters were hijacking trucks and shooting rivals, Nitti was handling logistics. He coordinated shipments. He managed distribution networks. He kept the books. He made sure the money flowed. Rising quickly in the organization, Nitti displayed a talent for business, becoming known for efficiently smuggling Canadian whiskey into Chicago speakeasies. By the mid-1920s, Nitti was a high-ranking member of the Capone mob. But Chicago in the 1920s was a war zone. Rival gangs fought for territory. The North Side Gang, led by Dean O'Banion and later Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran, waged brutal wars against Capone's South Side outfit. In 1925, the North Siders tried to assassinate Johnny Torrio. He survived but decided he'd had enough of the mob life. He handed the outfit to Capone and retired. And with Capone now boss, Nitti's fortunes climbed. Capone thought so highly of Nitti that he made him one of his most trusted bodyguards. Nitti was always nearby, calm, quiet, efficient. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't violent, but he was essential. Despite his nickname, the Enforcer, Frank Nitti rarely took part in violent activities. He delegated them instead to underlings. In earlier days, Nitti had been one of Capone's trusted personal bodyguards. But as he rose in the organization, Nitti's business instinct dictated that he must personally avoid the dirty work, for which hitmen were paid. Nitti used mafia soldiers and others to commit violence rather than do it himself. When someone needed killing, Nitti gave the order. When someone needed to disappear, Nitti arranged it. But Nitti himself? He never pulled the trigger. This was smart. Bosses who got their hands dirty ended up dead or in prison. Nitti understood that the longer you stayed in the shadows, the longer you survived. In 1928, Nitti divorced his first wife, Rose, and married Anna Ronga, the daughter of a mob doctor and former neighbor of the Nittis. The couple adopted a son, Joseph, through the Tennessee Children's Home Society. By 1929, Frank Nitti was one of the most powerful men in Chicago. And then, in October 1929, Al Capone was sent to prison for contempt of court. While awaiting his trial for tax evasion, Capone needed someone to run the outfit in his absence. Capone thought so highly of Nitti that when he went to prison in 1929, he named Nitti as a member of a triumvirate that ran the mob in his place. Nitti was head of operations, with Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik as head of administration and Tony Joe Batters Accardo as head of enforcement. Frank Nitti was now effectively running the Chicago outfit. In 1931, Al Capone was convicted of income tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The most famous gangster in America was finished. And Frank Nitti? He was also convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 18 months in prison. But those 18 months changed him forever. Severely claustrophobic, Nitti served his time in extreme discomfort. The walls closed in. The air felt suffocating. Every day was torture. He learned that he was psychologically incapable of handling confinement. When Nitti was released in 1932, the media dubbed him the new boss of Capone's gang. In reality, Nitti was the face of the Chicago outfit, while another man, Paul the waiter, Rika, was its true leader. But Nitti was the one law enforcement targeted. And on December 19, 1932, Chicago police decided to eliminate him. A team of CPD officers raided Nitti's office and shot him 3 times, twice in the back, once in the neck. One of the officers non-lethally shot himself in the leg to make it look as if the officers had acted in self-defense. But Nitti survived. During the trial, it was revealed that one of the officers had been paid $15,000 to murder Nitti. The officers who had led the conspiracy were fired from the police force and fined. Nitti was acquitted of attempted murder in February 1933. The enforcer had survived. And now, he was angrier than ever. After Prohibition ended in 1933, the Chicago outfit needed new revenue streams. Bootlegging was over. The easy money was gone. But Nitti saw opportunity. He turned the outfit's attention to labor unions and Hollywood. Under his guidance, the mob expanded into labor racketeering and gambling. Nitti masterminded schemes to control labor unions in Chicago, using this influence to shake down businesses and secure lucrative contracts for mob-controlled companies. One of Nitti's most ambitious moves was extending the outfit's reach into Hollywood. Through control of projectionists and other film industry unions, Nitti's organization extorted major studios by threatening strikes or damage to film distribution. The outfit controlled unions like the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE. If a studio didn't pay, projectionists wouldn't show the films. Theaters would go dark. Millions would be lost. The studios paid. From the mid-1930s to the early 1940s, the Chicago outfit extorted more than $2 million from major studios, including Columbia Pictures, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM, Paramount Pictures, RKO Pictures, 20th Century Fox Warner Brothers. This marked a significant evolution in organized crime, blending union manipulation with corporate shakedowns on a national scale. Nitti also pushed the outfit to expand geographically, taking control of crime in parts of Wisconsin, Missouri, California, and Nevada, where legalized gambling eventually became the mob's most lucrative source of income. Frank Nitti had transformed the Chicago outfit from a violent bootlegging empire into a sophisticated, business-oriented underworld syndicate. But that expansion eventually brought Nitti down. In 1943, the federal government handed down a raft of indictments accusing Chicago mobsters of extorting the largest movie studios in Hollywood. Among those prosecuted were Frank Nitti Paul, the waiter, Rika Phil, D'Andrea Louis, Little New York, Campagna, Nick Circella, Charles Cherry Nose, Gio, Ralph Pierce, John Handsome Johnny, Roselli. The indictments were handed down in New York on March 18, 1943. Federal marshals prepared to arrest Nitti. But at a meeting of outfit leaders at Nitti's home, Paul Ricca blamed Nitti for the indictments. The message was clear. You brought this heat. You're taking the fall. Nitti faced a choice. Go to trial, likely be convicted, and spend the rest of his life in prison. Or cooperate with the feds and testify against his associates, which would result in his murder. Either way, he was dead. And for a man who was severely claustrophobic, who had spent 18 months in agony behind bars, the idea of life in prison was worse than death. March 19, 1943, a cold Friday morning in North Riverside, Illinois. Frank Nitti's second wife, Annette, Tony Caravetta, left for church. Nitti stayed home. He poured himself drinks. He got drunk. And then, around 10 a.m., he walked out of his house at 712 Selborne Road and headed toward the Illinois Central Railroad tracks near Harlem Avenue and Cermak Road. Two railroad workers, William Seebauer and another man, were working near the tracks when they spotted a man wandering aimlessly along the rail line. He looked drunk, disoriented. At one point, he nearly got hit by a train. The workers lost sight of him for a moment. Then they spotted him again, sitting against a fence. They started walking toward him. As they got closer, about 20 feet away, they saw a gun in his right hand. We were about 6 or 8 car lengths past the man, one worker later recalled. There was nobody around and the fellow was half sitting and half lying against the fence. The gun was in his right hand. The workers kept walking slowly. They got so close they could see the man's eyes rolling. One of them hollered at him. The man looked up. His eyes rolled. And then, Frank Nitti raised the .32 caliber Colt revolver to his head. Bang! Frank Nitti died at the scene. He was 57 years old. Police quickly identified his body. In his pockets, they found his draft registration card, listing his home address in Riverside, his automobile driver's license, giving his address as 1208 Lexington Street, Chicago, the home of Mrs. Lucia Ronga, mother of Nitti's first wife, Anna, who had died 18 months earlier. Both cards listed his birth date as January 27, 1886, and his name as Nitto. At 11 a.m., an inquest was held at the county morgue. The coroner ruled it a suicide. Police Sergeant William Rowe announced to the press, the chief of the Capone syndicate killed himself. But conspiracy theories immediately emerged. Some believed Nitti didn't commit suicide, that he was murdered by fellow outfit members to keep him quiet. Others believed corrupt police officers killed him, just as they'd tried in 1932. But the evidence supported suicide. Nitti was drunk. He was despondent. He was facing life in prison, a fate he couldn't psychologically handle. Frank Nitti had chosen death over confinement. Just hours after Nitti's death, the New York federal grand jury handed down the Hollywood extortion indictments. Paul Ricca took over as boss of the Chicago outfit. He and the other defendants were convicted and sentenced to prison. But Ricca continued to run the outfit from behind bars, eventually passing leadership to Tony Accardo. Nitti's widow, Annette, was left to deal with the aftermath. She was embroiled in tax controversies surrounding Frank's estate for years. In 1957, she was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury investigating the income tax returns of Paul Ricca. Frank Nitti was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois, the same cemetery where Al Capone was buried just 4 years later. Controversy persisted regarding the interment of a suicide in a Catholic cemetery, but Nitti's grave was allowed. It can be found to the left of the main Roosevelt Road entrance, about 50 feet from the gate. To the right of the gate is the family plot containing Al Capone's grave, marked by a 6-foot white monument stone. Straight up from the gate are the graves of Dean O'Banion and Jaime Weiss, both North Side gang members who the Chicago outfit killed under Capone. Even in death, Frank Nitti was surrounded by the men he'd helped destroy. Frank Nitti's impact on organized crime is often overshadowed by Al Capone's legend. But historians argue that Nitti was more important to the outfit's survival than Capone ever was. Capone was flashy, violent, and reckless. He drew attention, he made enemies, and he ended up in prison. Nitti was quiet, calculating, and strategic. He avoided the spotlight. He built systems. He diversified revenue streams. He turned the Chicago outfit from a gang into a corporation. Under Nitti's leadership, the outfit expanded into labor, racketeering-controlled Hollywood unions, extorted millions from major film studios, took over gambling operations in multiple states, established a foothold in Nevada that would eventually lead to mob control of Las Vegas. Nitti was respected but not feared in the way Capone had been. He ruled more as a consensus builder among the outfit's top figures, including influential lieutenants like Paul Ricca and Tony Accardo. His ability to manage internal conflicts and keep the organization profitable made him an effective, if understated, leader during turbulent times. But in the end, Nitti's one weakness, his claustrophobia, destroyed him. He couldn't face prison. He couldn't handle confinement. And rather than live behind bars, he chose to die on his own terms. They called him the Enforcer. But he never enforced anything himself. He had others do the dirty work. Frank Nitti was Al Capone's right hand, the man who kept the Chicago outfit running when Capone went to prison. He transformed bootlegging into labor racketeering. He extorted Hollywood. He built an empire. But he had one weakness. He couldn't handle being caged. And on March 19, 1943, facing extortion charges and life in prison, Frank Nitti walked to a railway yard, put a .32 caliber revolver to his head, and pulled the trigger. The enforcer who'd terrorized Chicago for 20 years couldn't face four walls closing in. He died drunk, alone, slumped against a fence near the train tracks, choosing his own end rather than let the government decide it for him. The Chicago outfit continued without him, but they never forgot. In the mob, the only freedom you truly control is the choice of how you die.